Peace be upon you. Thank you everyone for coming. Thank you Carl DeMaio, Scott Peters for honoring us with this forum. The format of tonight is going to be, we have some written questions we're going to be asking each of the candidates. And we're also going to be taking some questions, but written questions from the audience as well. So while the candidates are answering the questions, you guys are able to write questions down and it'll be passed to me. And with time permitting, we're going to be taking as many as we can. Each question we're going to ask is going to take about, we're going to give both candidates about 2 minutes to respond. So without further ado, we'll get right into it. Sitting next to me is Carl DeMaio. He is running for Congress, and he's running against Congressman Scott Peters. So the first question, Congressman Peter King recently said, "We have to go all out with surveillance of Muslims." He also promoted the NYPD undercover surveillance of Muslims and suggested that the undercover police officers and paid informants should enter mosques to compile data about the Muslim community. Do you agree with the statement, and do you think the statement has evidence or merit? And what would you do to uphold the constitutional rights of American Muslims and other Americans?
Well, good evening. I'm going to stand rather than sit so I can see all of you. Appreciate you coming tonight and having an interest in how we can move our country forward and solve very big problems. With the top of the list being fixing our national fiscal crisis, making government work, the important programs that we all rely on are not meeting our expectations, getting the economy going and getting people back to work. The problem is that you have these political parties that are divisive. And what Mr. Peter King said, I don't believe is the right way to talk about this issue, nor is it the right way to handle this issue. We should have a zero tolerance on racial profiling. Nobody should be targeted on the basis of their religious beliefs or their ethnicity, period. That is not our country. It's not respectful. Second, I have actually been a very libertarian in terms of defending people's personal freedoms. For example, I'm against the NSA spying program, where they can look at our cell phones, they can look at our emails, they can look at our chat logs without due process. I believe that you have due process under our Constitution and that we cannot take that away from anyone. And finally, tone matters. In San Diego, one of the things I'm most proud of San Diego is that we are a city of great diversity. We have various cultures and religions here. We have various socioeconomic beliefs here. But despite the diversity of San Diego, we are a very tranquil and integrated and respectful city. I'm so proud of that, and I hope you are as well. We don't see that sort of respect and tranquility across the country. And all too often, our members of Congress speak with disrespectful tones about different communities in this country. We need to get past that. We need to be tolerant, we need to be diverse, we need to be inclusive and respectful with how we talk about all the communities that make up this great country, including the Islamic community.
You mentioned NSA. This question is directly directed to that. What do you think of NSA collecting info on all Americans, quote unquote, and what will you do to control out-of-control agencies?
Well, I'm glad that we're segueing into that question, because this is something that's a big priority for me. You have constitutional freedoms. We all have constitutional freedoms. Those constitutional freedoms are not encumbered, they are not limited, they are not contingent upon your faith or your ethnicity or your income or your gender or your orientation or your political beliefs. They are not incumbent upon any of those factors. You have them because you have a human right to these freedoms. That's the beauty of our Constitution. And you can't say that you're defending freedom in the war on terror if you trample freedoms that you say you hold dear. We cannot have that as the way in which we handle issues. And so I would have voted for the Amash Amendment, which would have provided protections and limitations to the unbridled authority that these intelligence services and the NSA have to look at our private records and to basically say, we are just simply going to go in and look for words. We're going to look for languages. And then on that basis alone, you become a suspect or a target. No, it's not acceptable. We have in this country due process. And let me tell you right now, if the federal government has an issue, they can always go before a judge and very easily get a search warrant. But what the NSA is claiming they have the ability to do is not seek a search warrant. It's warrantless wiretaps, warrantless reviews of your information. And that cannot be tolerated. And that's why I think that we need to make reforms to those powers, make sure that we have a balanced approach to how we deal with collecting information, analyzing information, and ultimately dealing with some of the issues that we have to deal with to protect human lives. And by the way, my opponent voted against that position. He voted to give government those authorities and powers, and I believe that that's an important distinction in this race.
The U.S. promotes democracy in the Middle East, and yet has gone out of its way to support non-democratic regimes and to assault democratic regimes. The U.S. has violated U.S. law to provide aid to Egypt following a coup, while at the same time aiding and abetting Israel's offensive against Hamas's democratically elected regime in Gaza. What ways and means would you pursue to align American commitment in support of the stated value of democracy regarding Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and Gaza, such that America and Americans are not viewed as ridiculous hypocrites internationally?
Well, I subscribe to the Cap Weinberger philosophy on foreign policy and use of force. Cap Weinberger was the defense secretary under President Ronald Reagan, and he said, we should not get involved in a foreign conflict. We should not use our military until there are two criteria that are satisfied. Number one, the issue or the conflict, the matter at hand, relates to a direct national security issue or interest of the United States. And he was very narrow in how he defined that. He said lives of American citizens are currently under threat, or if this situation gets out of control, will very soon be under threat. We have not held to that criteria in many instances. And there are some examples where we've gotten into a conflict that might meet that criteria at the forefront, but we've had mission creep and gotten involved in issues that we never should be involved in the first place. The second criteria is pretty clear, which is once you decide that something is our business, it's a national security interest or threat that we should be involved in, we need to have a plan of action to win. We need to support our service members with the resources that they need and the strategy they need to win whatever conflict. And defining what win means is very important as part of that for any good plan. We have violated that criteria in Iraq and Afghanistan, in my opinion, in the last 15 years. And so I would like to very clearly go back to those criteria and narrow down our footprint around the globe. Narrow down our intervention to those issues where it relates to our national security rather than getting involved with conflicts around the world. I will say that I think we should review our foreign aid budget comprehensively, and that we need to evaluate every dollar spent in foreign aid to determine whether it meets our national security interests. I know some people out there say, well, we should be giving money to various regimes for various economic issues and what. I am very specific about return on investment, and I think the American people would demand that as well. I support a two-state solution in Palestine and Israel of peaceful coexistence, and we can be part of that. But unfortunately, we cannot be the ones to determine whether that happens. That will be up to the stakeholders in that region to decide whether that can happen. I do believe that the individuals, the people on both sides of that issue desire peace. I unfortunately see political groups that are desiring to tear people apart. It happens here in this country. How many issues are we seeing most people agree on? What happens with the political parties in Washington? They foment dissension and division. Why? For political reasons. For political reasons, they think that works better. And so my hope is that we can take that new tone and tenor on these issues as it relates to foreign policy and, by extension of foreign policy, foreign aid.
Thank you. And a follow-up to that question, if chosen to Congress, how would you specifically deal in voicing your opinion on how we should deal with non-democratic regimes in the Middle East, such as in Egypt and so forth, that they're mentioned, as opposed to not supporting the democratically elected regimes in both Palestine and Egypt?
I think it's very clear that it should be driven exclusively by our national security goals and what would advance the U.S.'s interests the best. That is, frankly, what our foreign policy should always be predicated on. Do I support democracy and human rights? Absolutely, we all do. But does that mean that we go in and have a military intervention to install democratic governments? I don't believe that that's our role. I do believe, however, that we fare better when aligning ourselves to true democracies. We've seen study after study that democracies don't attack other democracies. There are rare exceptions, but we need to be seeing our common values, our common goals in alignment with governments that respect human rights and promote democracy. And it's not just in the Middle East. My concern about what's happening in Hong Kong today, where those voters are not being given an opportunity to choose candidates without prior approval of Beijing. I don't think that the United States should be silent about that. Now, does that mean that we go in and intervene? No. But we can be very clearly on record, and we can decide not to have foreign aid to those governments that we believe are trespassing on the human rights, trampling the human rights of their citizens.
On the economy, unemployment is still a problem in San Diego. At the federal level, what would you do to help stimulate the local economy?
I'm a small business owner. I started my business right out of college. I had to put myself through college because I didn't have parents. At age 13, the Jesuit priests of the Catholic faith took me in and raised me and gave me a great education. When I left college, I decided I wanted to start my own company. I couldn't get a bank to give me a loan because I had no access to financing. So I did what any college kid would do in my shoes. I maxed out 2 credit cards and started my company. I was able, through luck and hard work and a good idea, to actually build not one company but 2 companies by the age of 28 and sold both by age 34. Here's the problem. If I were to try to do that over again starting in 2014, I would be a failure. I wouldn't be able to get financing, which is the same problem I had in 1998. But worse than that, the economy is bad, taxes are higher, regulations and mandates just strangle small businesses. Now, I think we need to do 3 things to change this. Number 1, we've got to reform the tax code so that it's flatter and fairer and lower, particularly for small businesses. Big business is doing just fine, by the way. General Electric last year made $108 billion. General Electric, the guys that make the refrigerators and aircraft, $108 billion. Do you know how much they paid in corporate taxes? 0. Now, I ask small business owners all the time a number of questions. What's your worst regulation? Well, the other question I ask is, how much do you pay in taxes off the top of your head? Do you know what the answer is? Almost always 50% or higher. The small business owner is getting soaked while the big businesses are walking around with the subsidies and paying 0. That's not a prosperity-oriented, American dream-driven tax code, and we need to change that. Number 2, we got to cut those mandates I told you about earlier. Cut the red tape, the mandates, the regulations that cost money for businesses. Third, we need to make sure that our children have the education, the skills that they need to compete in a 21st century economy. So strong K through 12 education and access to student loans. Of all these ads that are out there, by the way, I can take a punch. I'm a big boy, all right? But for Mr. Peters to say I'm against student loans, it's a bald-faced lie. And it's personal to me because I needed student aid and student loans to get my degree. And I'm going to defend every single opportunity for our children to get access to affordable college education, and the student loan program is an important part of that, and I will be a strong supporter, as I always have been, of student loans. Those are the three keys to the economy. Reform the tax code, cut the red tape and mandates, and make sure that our workforce, our children, have the skills they need to compete in a 21st century economy, which is K through 12 and access to student loans.
And I just wanted to also remind our guests that we have quite a few questions that came online before the forum, as well as what's coming in. So what I'm doing is I'm just sort of segmenting. If it was similar to questions already asked, I'm including in that. We're probably not going to get to all the questions, but for the sake of time, we're going to be picking and choosing the questions. The next question is, the Muslim community has been unfairly targeted. Our places of worship are threatened. What would you do to help American Muslims be safer?
No, I was asked by a lady recently. She said, well, we don't want these mosques located in our communities. And I turned it around and I said, I know that you have your faith. I respect your faith. But what would you say if I said that there were groups that didn't want your synagogue in our community? And she said, well, it's different. I said, is it? Is it different? It's not different, in my opinion. We have freedom of religion in this country. It's a bedrock of what made our country great. I may not share an individual's religion, but I will defend their right to worship in peace. I mean, in the city council, by the way, I had a number of churches come to me because the city of San Diego gave them the runaround on permits for their worship facilities, their churches. I don't know if you know this, but you think as you drive down the road, you see a lot of large churches. Well, those are actually not the greatest percentage of churches that we have in San Diego. Many of our churches are in industrial lands, in retail shops. It is very hard to locate a church. In my campaign office building, we have a church. They've taken commercial space and they have torn down walls and they've made it work for them. Now, many of these churches are trying to raise money so that they can buy land and build their own facility. I was at the Chinese Bible Church, and they're worried because they have a site, but they are afraid that the community will not support the location of their church. So this doesn't just happen with Muslims. It happens with many of our churches, and we must all work together. All faiths have to bind together and say, we have a constitutional freedom of assembly and religion. And that must be guaranteed for all.
How can we promote democracy abroad when we don't have it at home within an entrenched two-party system that writes laws to erase independent competitors and has a complicit corporate media to psychologically condition Americans into only thinking in terms of the two parties? What would you do to support ballot access reform?
I love this question. When people hear me speak, they say, the number one question I get after a speech, are you a Democrat or a Republican? You know what? If you have to ask me that question, I think I did a pretty good job. I think both political parties are broken, and they're the reason why we have so much dysfunction in Washington. Now, I can't go in and change both political parties because I've got to be part of one or the other. For my part, I'm taking on my own party. I think our party has not been solutions-oriented enough. I think they've been the party of no, 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 no. Well, I want to change that so that it's a party of great ideas. Number two, I don't think that my party has been inclusive enough. You can't be the old white man's party and reflect America. There's nothing wrong with old white men, by the way. But they're not just America. I want a party that can go into every community. Whether they get votes or not is immaterial, but go to every community to do one thing. Listen. Listen to their concerns. Listen to their hopes, their dreams, their aspirations, their frustrations. Listen. And take what you have heard and make good policy. If you don't show up, you won't represent and be inclusive. Third, I believe that this party needs to get off the divisive moral and social issues and let our faith and family beliefs and individual choices govern those issues. Government should not be mandating its way on these issues. I'm willing to do my part by taking on my party. My hope is that I'll find others in the other party to do the same for theirs, because both these parties need to be shaken up.
With the influence of lobbying groups and lobbying powers, specifically from the military-industrial complex, what will you do to limit their influence within Congress and in politics within the White House, and speak up in regards to limiting the lobbying group's powers?
Well, I think they already know that I'm limiting their influence because they're not backing me. My opponent has collected $1.5 million in Wall Street defense and big business PAC dollars. You all know what a PAC is? Big businesses get the money, they throw it into these races. My money is coming from individuals. I'm going to individuals who are Democrats, Republicans, and people in between, from every walk of life, and saying, I need your help, because the big guys aren't backing me. Down at City Hall, I was proud of the fact that I always represented what I felt my constituents would benefit from. How many of you remember that new City Hall project that they were trying to push through in 2008, 2009? Million square foot new building, $400 million. My response was, wait a minute, you guys can't fill potholes and you're building a new building for yourself? Let's get priority. They started taking our money to the downtown developers. The big developers downtown were taking our money out of the general fund and taking them away from police and fire and libraries and parks and road repairs, and they were subsidizing Petco Park and condo towers and the convention center. I said, well, no. It's time for redevelopment to pay back. Donna Fry and I worked on that initiative, and we got it done. Because I did that, these lobbyists said, we're going to come after you in this next election. The head of the redevelopment agency funded a super PAC against me to attack me. And we had developers say, well, we would have made money off that new City Hall project, and we're not going to support you because you are not a team player. I'm going to fight for the constituents and the people, not for the lobbyists and the special interests.
And for the last 5 minutes, I want to give Mr. DeMaio time to just address us on why he would deserve our votes and why we should vote for him specifically.
I appreciate that, and I really do appreciate you all coming tonight. I'm very happy to see such a large and diverse crowd here tonight. This boils down to whether we want to make government work. Government is clearly broken. And we can blame Democrats for that, or we can blame Republicans for it. My view is I think both of them have their fingerprints on the murder weapon. They're not solving problems, they're not fixing, instead they're more interested in fighting. I'm willing to take on my own party, as I've said before. And I've challenged them. I've gotten a lot of national attention because I have challenged this party to modernize. When I grew up, I remember being a kid in a broken family and turning on the TV and seeing this happy, optimistic, positive individual who, no matter what the challenge was, he seemed to always feel that we could, as a country, as America, that we could make it happen. His name was Ronald Reagan. And you may not agree with everything Ronald Reagan stood for, but he exuded hope. Hope. We could make it happen. We could overcome. Today, when you think about the Republican Party, the H word, isn't hope. It's hate. Rightly or wrongly, too many Americans see the word hate. That's not healthy. And so I want to help change that. We get these parties working together again. What should our priorities be? You give the government a lot of your money. You spend a lot of the money in taxes. They take it out of your paycheck. They take it out of your purchases. They take it out of your property tax. They take it out of your gas. You give them a lot of money. We demand, we deserve quality of services for that money. We've paid the price. We should receive the services. That's why on City Council, when I fixed the city's financial crisis, I said it's not just about balancing the budget and spending money wisely. It's about getting our kids the library hours, getting them the after-school programs, starting to fix sidewalks and streets, making sure that we have adequate fire coverage. That's what you expect. Yes, manage the money properly, but give us the services that we deserve for a quality community and an opportunity. Second, we have to get people back to work. The best solution to many of our problems is employment, jobs. And yet too many working families are falling behind. Too many small business owners I talk to are at the emotional breaking point of saying, it's not worth it. It's not worth it anymore. I made more money just by myself. I don't want to have an employee. It's not what it used to be. We have families who want to pass on a business generation to generation. And those family businesses are struggling. And so we have to have an economic strategy of full employment, of prosperity, and the education system that helps people get those jobs. Third, and finally, we got to force Congress to live under the same laws as us. These people are privileged. I mean, one of the things that I'm most animated about is how these politicians, whether it was at City Hall, when my opponent cut services and left financial problems, but gave himself $69,000 in taxpayer money, your money, to pay for his BMW. How many of you get what he took each year, $9,600 to drive to and from work? Does your employer or the government give you $9,600 to drive to and from work? Why does a politician have a right to take that money? They have no right, in my opinion. How can a politician retire after only 4 years on the city council and earn more in retirement than Social Security? By the way, at the young, tender age of 34. It's outrageous. It's your money. But these politicians, they take the gifts, they take the corporate money, they take the pensions, the healthcare subsidies. They talk about Obamacare. Well, guess who gets the richest Obamacare subsidy? Members of Congress get the best healthcare out there. And then they don't pass a budget. They don't pass a budget, and they still get paid. My opponent decided to vote to let members of Congress get paid even though they shut down the government. They got paid. If you didn't do your job, would you get paid? And so here's the thing. This isn't a Democrat or Republican problem. Both Democrats and Republicans in Congress, they've given themselves goodies at our expense. They've exempted themselves from laws that we have to live under. And I think it's time that we knock them down a notch and say, you live under the same laws as the rest of us, and your pay is benchmarked to what we receive in the real world. We can do that. We can do that. Now, one last thing. You may not agree with everything I said tonight. Think about your marriage. Do you agree with everything your spouse has to say? Probably not. Now, if you want, you men out there, if you want to have a good home-cooked meal, you got to make sure that everything is nice and copacetic at home. I get it. But you don't always agree, but you love each other. Your children, you don't always agree with your children, but you love them. You want what's best for them. My hope is that I've been candid and blunt with you tonight on my views. I will always be blunt. I don't like sugarcoating it. I don't like deception. I will be honest. My hope is you agree with 80% of what I said. That does not make us a 20% enemy. It makes us an 80% ally. And suppose for a moment that you only agree with 20% of what I said. Well, then why don't we work together on getting that 20% done? And maybe the shared accomplishment of doing that will build trust and a relationship to work through the areas where we disagree. I really appreciate your time tonight. I appreciate the sponsorship of this forum. Thank you very much. My table's in the back as well.
Thank you, Mr. DeMaio. I'd like to introduce